calling this meeting to order. And our first order of business today is that we have a special visitor at today's informational meeting. Mr. Cannon Tucker is here today from Hampton, Virginia, visiting his daughter, Assistant City Clerk Denise Tucker. And we want to give you a warm welcome, Mr. Tucker, to Sioux Falls, and thank you for stopping by. By the way, we really like your daughter. She keeps us in line, so we're keeping her. So. Okay, first order of business is the City Council staff report, and we're going to get updates from Deborah A. Owen, City Clerk.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Sioux Falls City Council. Just a couple of things, most of which was sent to you in a memo from last week. But if you'll notice, there's this calendar before you, for those of you who are in attendance today. If you could look at those weekends and possible retreat times. I know we had talked about the end of October, but I know we have a conflict for one council member, and so and I haven't heard from all of you yet. So if you could fill out available dates that you could possibly do a type of retreat as we head toward reworking the goals and the objectives for 2009, in particular with performance measurement, to kind of begin to identify what some of those generalized statements mean in terms of specific city programs and functions, and then we'll look to prioritize them during that retreat. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Questions, Deborah? Very good. Thank you, Deborah. Next is Mayor Munson's office. I don't see anybody up front here. I know we're going to. Next is Mayor Munson's office. I don't see anybody up front, but I know we're going to be hearing from somebody from the office later on in the session. So we're going to move on to number 4, the Audit Committee. Anybody here from Audit?
No report.
No report. Fiscal Committee.
No report.
No report there either. Okay, Land Use Committee is, boy, I thought I was going to have a report that we actually had a meeting today, but it was canceled due to lack of items to talk about, so nothing there. And then number 7 is Public Services Committee.
No report.
I keep going to Vernon. Kenny, I apologize. I keep forgetting you're the new chair down there, so no report. Well, that was pretty good. Item number 8 is City Council open discussion. Does anybody have anything that they'd care to share with the group? Mr. Jameson.
I just want to share a little bit about last Saturday's listening session. We had a pretty good turnout. We had roughly 10 people show up. I guess that's a good turnout. The week prior we had none, so I think that's a great increase.
500%.
We've got to figure out something if it'll work to keep doing it every Saturday. Saturday is kind of a tough time, you know, for all of our schedules, and let alone the city staff that was there. We had several people there that was great. Gene Roynhorst was there. Mark Cotter was there. Even my dad showed up. He's got nothing else to do. But I'd like to talk further, I guess, sometime about a plan to keep something like this alive. I'm not exactly sure where or when and how, but I think it's worth discussing, and I wish there was a few more council members here to further discuss it, but I'd really like to try and keep it alive if possible. It's tough. I mean, I got an earful from people who were there. Pat Costello was there, and that was great. I'm sure he got an earful too. It's not a joyful time, you know, to get an earful from citizens that are generally upset. There wasn't maybe but a couple that were happy about what we were doing or how we do what we do. But it's still worth it, and I know you guys all feel that way. It's good to hear from our constituents. If there's a way to make it work for everybody going forward, I'd like to try to come up with a solution so we can all participate. I've kind of set the timelines in the last couple for myself, and I don't want to continue that. I want it to be something that works for everybody. So, you know, any discussions or thoughts you guys have about it, I'd sure love to help keep it moving.
Well, Greg, I want to apologize to you for missing those two, but things came up there, and in my case both, but I think it's a good idea. I think it's worth pursuing. You did say something that, you know, the people that did come down gave you an earful. Well, I think about all of them that didn't come down that must be contented with what you're doing because they didn't show up. So, but yeah, let's. I think that we have to do that on a regular basis and make it consistent for it to be successful. And I don't exactly know what that is, and I would actually like to discuss that and you know, take that idea a little bit further with the rest of the council members. maybe on an informal basis. But I think you're onto something. I think we need to do it. Anything else? Anybody else? No, very good, very good. Well, okay, we're going to move on here to the reports. And the first thing that we have is Gene Rowenhorst, the Director of Finance, is going to come up with our monthly financial update. Gene?
Gene Rowenhorst, Director of Finance. You should have all received a copy of this report last Friday, I believe, to review. And this is just our monthly update, kind of on what's going on. The good news is it's relatively quiet. There's not much to tell you about what's going on because everything seems to be working the way it should be. Taking a look at the general fund on page 1, the thing to point out there, I believe, is that our two ratios are still running right where they should be, or at this time of the year, and we're well within our standards that have been set for the ratios. One is 33.4%, and that's the one our reserve balance against the 25% policy. And then the actual cash balances, we're sitting right now pretty high at 31.7, and that's against our standard of 11%. That's due to property taxes coming in and our receipts of the property taxes. In the expenditure side, if you look down the percentage of budget spent, they're all what I would call within the standard. The one thing to point out, I think under license and permits, that's at 63%. That's really due to the fact that we have, I believe it was 3 more liquor licenses than we planned on that we were able to sell. So the other expenditures are pretty well within the standards, and I really don't see any issues with that. Our sales tax, we still have 58% of the year elapsed, and as you can see, we still have plenty of cash available of $26 million, so we're working fine there. That $26 million, if our taxes remain on the 2% target, or not target, but 2% level that they've been at, increase, you can see from the $26 million, we would have a lot of money probably available to cash flow, whatever we had to, if we wanted to, over year end. That would be one of the alternatives we would have. Looking at the sales tax on page 3, as you can see, we are right at the 2% level as far as the rate of increase. Still no explanation for really what's happened, why it's down like that. We don't get information that we can figure that out, that we have the ability to pull and tear it apart and figure out what the deal is. So it'll be interesting. We don't have anything in July here yet, so July. We don't have anything in at the end of August yet, which would be the July receipts. And so we can't really know that in the next, it'll be by the end of this week we should have it. And I'll send you an email, let you know where that's at. Then we have all of our other funds. There's not much to talk about there. Where am I at here? If you look at the transit fund, which there's been a little bit of discussion about that recently, there's the 08 budget calls for $8.5 million in revenue. Just to give you a sense of where that revenue comes from, $662,000 of that comes from services for operating. So that's the actual per ride ticket that we charge people. We then $4,008,000 is the actual subsidy that the city pays to the transit people. We have an additional federal funding of just $1.9 million. That is federal money. We get another $46,000 from the state, which is money from that is primarily for the paratransit services. And then we got $1.8 million of federal funding that comes in for capital purposes. And that number is impacted heavily. We're going into a cycle for our a new set of buses. There's agreements that we have with the Department of Transportation for funding those, and that agreement has expired. So, all right, I don't know that it's expired, but we're in the window where we have to take advantage of putting new buses out on the streets, or we would lose that federal money.
So, Gene, Councilor Brown has a question.
Just a clarification, Gene, 1.9 in operating and 1.9 in capital for transit, or is it just 1.9 for capital?
1.9 for federal operating, so that money can go for operating expenses. And then we have $1,856,000 that is for capital purposes only, cannot be spent for operating. So that gives you a little bit of an update on the transit fund. The other funds that we have, there's really nothing that I have noted there. The enterprise funds on page 7, again, these are doing well. You can see the cash flows that are being generated from operating activities. So our rates are working well. When you move into capital activities, though, you can see where we're kicking in with a lot of construction, water, and water reclamation. And what those are is capital improvements that are being made for. There's quite a few projects out there, so that takes a big bite out of our capital. But so the total cash flows from capital and related financing activities are a negative number. But when you get down to the bottom line, we've got cash there. So the cash flows are working okay, and so for the time being, it appears that we're going to be just fine with those activities. And then in the capital improvement program and where we're at there, on page 9 in particular, I wanted to draw to your attention. You have 60th Street North from Kiwanis Avenue to, I'm not sure where it goes to, but there's $2,150,000 there that there has not been any funds taken out yet. The reason they haven't is this is a contract with the state, and those are reimbursable funds. I don't know when the contract will actually be carried over there, but because of the reimbursable process, that money will sit there until the state actually gives it to us. That, I don't have anything to report on our debt situation. That's within boundaries there. We haven't done anything new other than some SRF type stuff, but that's pretty much what's happened so far this month. Like I say, it's basically pretty dull, which we like it that way.
Thank you, Gene. Questions to Gene? Councilor Costello.
Gene, no concern that we're still running 2% sales tax growth and we budgeted 6.5%?
Well, as I said, we've got $26 million in cash in there, so we've got some funds that are going to be available to cash flow it if we come up short. We're watching that very closely, and probably in September, probably more likely in October, we're going to have to make some judgments about what we do if that stays at that 2%. I don't know, I heard retail sales came out pretty good, I guess, today for the nation. Maybe the consumer's coming back. Christmas is going to be, the tough part is going to be we make our money at Christmas time, and we're not going to know where that number's at before we have to close out the year end. That's the ticklish part.
Anybody else? Very good. Thank you, Gene. Thanks for that update. The next thing that we have on our staff reports is we have a cable TV franchise renewal agreement. The report is by Adrian Herbst. He's an attorney with the Baller Herbst Law Group. Adrian, would you please come forward?
I'm not Adrian, but my name is Karen Leonard. I'm an assistant city attorney, and I thought I'd make his introduction before he came up here. I am part of the city's cable franchise committee. It consists of myself, Mike Hall, the Director of Central Services, Carla Paulson, the Media Service Manager, and Gary Caldwell, Assistant City Attorney. And we are here today to present to you a franchise renewal report, which was prepared by the city's consultant, Adrian Herbst, who was retained by the city in 2007. In front of you, you should find a bound copy of that renewal report, but it does not have the appendices. This is the actual document, and I did give a binder to your Chief of Staff, Deborah Owen, so that there's several hundreds of pages of appendices to the renewal report, so she'll have a hard copy in the council staff, for the council staff's review, but what you have is the actual report itself in front of you. As background, the city on January 9th of 2007 received timely notice from Mid-Continent that it was seeking to renew its cable franchise with the city, which is set to expire on December 29th of 2009. And under the Federal Cable Act, the franchise renewal process commences during a window which begins 3 years before the existing franchise terminates. Before giving you Mr. Herbst's background, I wanted to let you know that we have been working on drafting a regulatory cable system franchise ordinance. We are expecting to bring that to you for your consideration in October, and we plan on giving Mid-Continent a chance to review it first and give us comments on the ordinance, and any other players that want to enter into the cable franchise arena comments, and then we'll bring over a draft of that ordinance for your consideration in October. And then we'll be negotiating with Mid-Continent a 10-year franchise renewal agreement or agreement with a 5-year option to extend that agreement. Turning to Mr. Herbst's background, he is here to give you an update on what steps the city's taken since 2007 and since receiving Mid-Continent's notice to renew. Mr. Herbst is based in Minneapolis and heads the office of the Baller Herbst Law Group. For more than 25 years, he has provided outside legal consulting assistance on cable and telecommunication matters. In fact, Mr. Herbst worked with the City of Sioux Falls when previous negotiations and development of the current franchise took place here in the city. He worked with my predecessor, Wally Doolittle, and the then City Attorney, Janet Brecky. He has served as president of the Minnesota Trial Lawyers Association and vice president of the League of Minnesota Cities, and is also a member of various other legal organizations, including the Federal Communications Bar Association and the Telecommunications Committee of the Minnesota State Bar. Mr. Herbst also has a unique background in municipal and government law and policy. He served as a full-time city attorney and was elected city councilman for 16 years to the city of Bloomington, Minnesota. In the areas of franchise law that he's recently been working on, his firm was retained to work with the city of Bismarck, North Dakota, on a franchise renewal with Mid-Continent Communications. We are drafting our ordinance and modeling it after Bismarck. He's also served as a consultant to the city of Grand Forks in its recent cable television franchise renewals, and also with Fargo, North Dakota. At this time, I present Mr. Adrian Herbst.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question of Karen?
Oh, yeah. Karen, could you come back? Mr. Staggers would like to have a question.
Yeah.
Yes.
Karen, how long has Midco had the franchise here in Sioux Falls?
They've had it for 15 years at the end of 2009. It will be 15 years.
And now we're coming up with a new ordinance here, regulatory ordinance?
That's correct.
Okay, so we've operated for 15 years without this ordinance. Why are we coming up with an ordinance?
Actually, I should have clarified that. We do have an ordinance on our books, but it's specific to Mid-Continent.
Oh, okay.
And we need a general regulatory ordinance because we anticipate further players in the market.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you, Karen, very much. I want to do a sort of a slide presentation, but by all means, I want to be able to answer any questions that you might have. And I think the whole idea of the slide presentation is just to kind of give you an overview or an education, as you will, about what is franchise renewal, what is it about, what's the role and responsibility of the city, then a little bit about what your rights are, because I think you'll be interested to know the fact that unlike any other utility or service that uses your rights away, the city has very, very broad powers and authority to oversee, to regulate, and to design, together with cable providers, services that meet the needs of a community. So what I'd like to do then is, with Carla's help, so I'm not fumbling around on the computer here, is to go through this slide presentation. I think Karen has just indicated some of the things that Mid-Continent Communications, or what we call Mid-Continent, is your current cable company, and they've requested a renewal of their franchise. She described the current date of the expiration of the existing franchise, and I think what will be important for you to understand is we have a federal law in this country called the Federal Cable Act that goes all the way back to 1984. It was modified several times since then that guide and establish the requirements regarding franchise renewal. And interestingly enough, when that law was put together, they created the renewal of a franchise for an existing cable operator, a presumption that their franchise would be renewed. So it's really the burden on the part of the city to determine that they're not qualified to have their franchise renewed. And that's a little bit about what this franchise renewal process is about. If we go to the next slide, you basically have, and Karen mentioned this to you, if a cable company has a franchise with you, they have the right 3 years before the end of that franchise term, during a window of 6 months, to give you a notice that they'd like to have their franchise renewed. And what that does then is establish a presumption of renewal, so that you then, a local government, the franchising authority, has to go about some kind of a process to determine whether or not their franchise should or should not be renewed. Why don't we go to the next slide? When I said that there's a presumption of renewal, what it really boils down to in the end is that you, as a local governing body, you have certain tests for renewal. In order to not renew their franchise, you'd have to find to the contrary on all of these standards that are listed up there. So this renewal report that's been put together is for the purpose of developing a record, to helping you understand their services, and has their service been satisfactory in the past? Have they provided satisfactory performance? Are they in compliance with their existing franchise? On a going forward basis, will they have the financial, legal, and technical qualifications? And will their new proposal meet the future needs of the city? So, next slide. If we look at all of that, what the next slide? Oh, okay, I'm sorry, backwards. What we try to do in this franchise renewal process in developing the report is there are a lot of constituencies or interest groups, one of which is the cable company themselves. So to understand their cable system, we sent them a request for information. And this very thick document that I think Karen showed you, a very substantial part of it is the information that Mid-Continent has provided to the city about their financial information, what it has been in the city, how they've operated their revenue stream, and so on. Their technical operation, how they've upgraded and improved the system, their operations, how they work in the city, system upgrades, and what they see as priorities for services, not only in the past but on a going forward basis. Next slide. Another way of gathering information to look at those tests for renewal is in the community itself. And we've done a household survey, sending out a random sample survey to households to gather information about the past performance of the cable company, what people would like to see for the future, and so on, because ultimately you have to decide, will their services meet the current and future needs of the city? So the people out there should have something to say about that. Your staff, I think Karen mentioned, you have a committee that has been working diligently on this, studying the issues and trying to develop information as well. We had a technical and operation review. A technical person that's qualified in looking at cable systems, looking at the information, and determining whether or not that cable system is capable of addressing the future needs has been part of this whole study. There have been community benefit requirements. Carla in particular has developed a lot of information about your public educational and governmental access channels and how they serve the community what's necessary for the future in terms of the number of channels, financing to support those channels, equipment, facilities, and so on. That's been very much part of this process. Well, in the end, if we go to the next slide, what we've come up with is this renewal report, which is really intended to help you, the city's governing body, get a good overview about what cable franchises are about, what we've gathered by way of information that's instructional and educational to help you to understand this, and then to move beyond that to what I think Karen mentioned to you, which is to develop an ordinance and franchise agreement. The renewal report outlines the process that we've had. It summarizes the information that's gathered. It identifies what we believe are some of the city requirements and priorities that should be considered. We've drafted a new ordinance and an agreement document, and I think Karen mentioned those will be coming up for city review as well as mid-continent review very soon. There will be a negotiation process with mid-continent. Of course, they'll have an opportunity to look over the documents, and if they find anything that they believe should require negotiation or further discussion, that will be part of the process as well. Going on. Just to help you the breadth and scope of this authority of the city and what's involved in this, I've tried to put together a few slides here about what some of the rights of the city are. You have the right under the Federal Cable Act to franchise anybody that is providing cable services in your community. You have the right to determine the community needs, and they require that cable operators meet those needs. You have limited space in your right-of-way. You need to make sure that those that are operating and providing services here do, in fact, meet and serve the needs of your community. So that's unique to you. It's not a standard type of thing for one size fits all. In the 25 or 35 years that I've been involved in cable services, I can't just take off the shelf a franchise and say, well, here we did this there, that's going to work here. Every community has its own personality, its own needs and interests, and those should be identified so that you can be part of this process. The law allows you certain requirements for community benefits in terms of public educational and governmental access, for example. Allows you to require channels that you will utilize for public programming, educational programming, and government programming, and also allows you to request that the fund provide equipment, facilities, or support that so that it can be successful in your community. You can also charge franchise fees. Now, there's a lot of debate a lot of times about franchise fees. I realize the city has been charging 3% of the gross revenue of the cable company for a franchise fee. You need to understand that a franchise fee under the federal law allows you to charge up to 5% of the gross revenues. And some people say that's too much, some say it's too little. There's often a debate about, well, what is a franchise fee? A franchise fee is simply a rental charge, like you're a landlord of your right-of-way, you're charging somebody rent for using your right-of-way. And the argument is it's fair and reasonable because those that are the private users of the public right-of-way, which numerous studies show cause degradation of rights-of-way in terms of replacement of the road, fix up here, replacement of boulevards, and so on, should help to pay for that as opposed to it all being subsidized by the general taxpayers of a city. So a franchise fee of up to 5% is your right to determine the amount that you want to charge and whether you will or won't impose a franchise fee or rent for use of your right-of-way. Next slide. A very, very important matter has to do with customer service standards. You know, how often do cable companies respond to customer complaints via telephone? How long do they put them on hold? Do they come out reasonably within a responsible time after somebody wants a service or has a maintenance problem and so on? You have the right to enforce standards that the FCC has put together that allows you to enforce to make sure that they're doing a good job in your community and meeting your local needs. You can have emergency alert requirements so that somebody at City Hall or another location can put out an emergency bulletin saying, you know, tornadoes are coming or what have you, to alert all the citizens in your community about those kinds of things. You can require them to comply with local construction standards so that they don't just simply rip up the right-of-way and not replace things or fix it up and so on. So this is very important. Another thing is the length of a term of a cable franchise is solely within your discretion. You have the right to decide that, and generally it's decided based on, well, how well is this cable company going to meet our needs in our community? Next slide. The cable companies have certain rights too, one of which is anything that you do as a city, charging a franchise fee, a public educational or governmental access fee, or those kinds of things, they have a right to put it on the bill of a subscriber and pass it through to subscribers. So that really then means that you need to be careful on the requirements that you make as being fair and reasonable, because ultimately the subscribers do have something to say about that as well. The rates and charges for their services, although you have some very limited authority to make sure they comply with standards, for the most part, they get to determine what it is that they charge for their services. Programming is the same. You can't tell them, you have to have HBO, you have to have the golf channel, the fitness channel, the food channel, or whatever. But you can establish broad categories of programs and services that meet your community needs. Transmission technology, you can't tell them, well, you need to have a fiber optic system that goes all fiber optics to the household. That kind of thing, you simply don't have the authority to do. They have the right under the law to decide how to design and build the system. The only thing that you have the right to do is to make sure that they are meeting your community needs. They also have a pretty big right because time changes, needs change. Some of the demands that you might have made today might not make sense in the future, and so they can have franchise obligations changed if they can show that they're commercially impracticable. So they have some very important rights there as well. The next slide. Converter boxes, those boxes in the home, again, you can't design those. That is a decision they make. The arrangement of services and the replacement of services or the removal of services also are within their rights. So you can see that the cable companies have rights, the cities have rights, and now the next slide will show that there are certain things that are involved in negotiation. And this is a good reason for a franchise renewal process, such as you have here, what we call an informal process. It allows you and the cable company to come together and talk about and agree on things that are most important to the city that neither of you have the sole right to decide. One of which is the design of the system. Is it going to meet the needs of the city? The term of the franchise, areas where there's going to be service, the insurance requirements, any cost reimbursements for unnecessary costs that they may cause the city to incur, a periodic review sometime down the road, recognizing that things change. You should have the right to, for example, evaluate change and to bring them to the table and look at, well, do we have a state-of-the-art system? Are our services up to date? And what changes should there be? Enforcement procedures and the administration as well are matters that I think are most important. Next slide. So what I've talked about so far is a renewal process with the obligation is, and the presumption of renewal, a little bit about the rights of the city and the rights of the cable company. Well, in this day and age, a lot is changing. We have broadband, which is voice, video, and data services, and we have competition and the potential of more service providers in the city that want to provide voice, video, and data services. The revenue stream for these services has greatly increased over the past days when you just had one cable operator providing entertainment television. It would be very hard to have a competitor in town. But that's no longer the case. Data services are provided, which is an alternative to telephone, teletext, newspapers, remote meter reading, energy management, video on demand, high-definition television. Just a whole host of new kinds of services are out there that people can subscribe and get that are changing the face of this whole thing. So, next slide. Well, what are we doing about this? First of all, as Karen mentioned to you, we're having a regulatory ordinance, and I think your question was most important. Why are we going to have that? And I wanted to address it because I think it is important. First of all, a master cable ordinance is most important because of the potential that you are likely going to have more than one cable provider here. It establishes the rules of the game, so to speak, so that everybody in advance knows, well, what's required in this city? What do I have to do? And so on. And I think that's really important. It makes sure that everybody is treated in a fair and equal manner, so there's a level playing field. I think also what's really important, and we'll talk about, is the Federal Communications Commission within the last year developed franchising orders. Now, there have been some appeals and arguments about whether or not they exceeded their legal authority and actually legislated, but the bottom line is these franchising orders of the FCC have addressed some of the issues of competition. That is, cities are a burden to entry. They're too costly for us to go through a franchising process. They take too much time. Cities require us to build out the entire city, and it's too expensive. How can we come into a city and build a cable system that serves the entire city from day one when you've got an entrenched local incumbent cable operator? So we, the FCC, have to deal with these issues, and they did. And this master ordinance that we've put together is in compliance with the new FCC orders, which is intended to create a level playing field, fair and reasonable standards. But a master ordinance is required in part also because the FCC said, well, cities, we're going to deal with what these people have been complaining about, and that's that you take too much time. And that if somebody wants to come and get a franchise from you, they have to complete an application. There are certain things that you can ask them to present to you, but now you have to complete a franchise agreement with them. If they're already here having legal access to your right-of-way like a telecom company or some other kind of a company, you only have 90 days to get an agreement with them, a new franchise. Well, that, in the overall scheme of things, is a very short period of time. If they're just somebody brand new off the street, they don't have any use of your right-of-way right now, you can have as much as 6 months. But a franchise agreement document is a very comprehensive, detailed matter and can take a long time to put together. But by having a master ordinance in place, a model franchise agreement, and an application form, and these things that we're putting together, you have in place the whole process, the steps, the requirements of the city, so that you're prepared to deal with this in a prompt and efficient manner and make sure that everybody is treated in a fair and reasonable manner. I think, next slide. What is this? Let's see. Am I right? Oh, excuse me. Go back one, sorry. I told her I couldn't operate that thing. I get so hung up on trying to focus on what I'm going to say, I might push the wrong button or something. So, well, what does a master ordinance do? It outlines and preserves the authority of the city to regulate the right-of-way. You're the owner of it. You're the stewards of the right-of-way. You ought to be able to control and manage the use of your right-of-way and set the standards for it. It creates a level playing field so that all users of the rights-of-way providing similar services are treated in a similar manner. It establishes the application requirements and the time periods that I've just described. Go ahead, next slide. The franchise process in your city, you know, what's expected if somebody comes here, what do they do, where do they go, what's required in this city, what is the review process, and so on. The master ordinance outlines that. It provides flexibility to make sure that the city isn't becoming some sort of a barrier to entry, but is welcoming competition, new services, and so on that meet your city needs. It creates a competitively neutral community environment, which puts you at the forefront of this communication revolution that's going on in our country and making sure that your community has the capabilities and services that are needed not only for residents but businesses as well, which is very important. It includes definitions of, you know, just a whole host of matters so that there isn't confusion about all of these services, and those that are administering this ordinance, as well as those that are seeking a franchise from you, will understand the requirements of the city. Lastly here, I think that's important, it complies with the latest state of the law, that is the Federal Cable Act and the orders of the Federal Communications Commission. It includes, if you go to the next slide, a process outline including the application for review, the area served and service extension requirements. Next slide. Conditions for using the right-of-way, such as public safety, insurance, protection against interference so that somebody can't just put their wires in the ground and somewhere other interfere with those that are already there. It encourages joint use of facilities to have the least amount of opening and shutting of the right-of-way. It protects the city's right-of-way investment for a whole host of reasons, including participation by those that are using the right-of-way in the financing and cost of repair and replacement of it, as well as encouraging joint use of the facilities. It deals with aesthetic considerations to make sure that what is done in the right-of-way is done in a way not only for public safety purposes, but in the least intrusive of setting way for the community itself. Next slide. It deals with services, programming, the broad categories of services and programming, your requirements for community benefits like public educational and governmental access, local origination, which means if there are going to be programs that are done professionally about this city and done by professional people, that there are channels available for that purpose. Next slide. One thing a lot of people don't understand is something called an institutional network, but you may or may not have known, the law goes back a long ways. When cable first began, there was a coaxial cable that was strung to homes. It was like a big antenna that served just houses. And then they said, well, what about our schools and our public buildings and so on? Can't we have a cable that serves them as well so that we can do things interchangeably between public buildings? The term called institutional network came from that. In other words, you had a separate line for subscribers and households and a separate line that serves schools and public buildings. Well, this is held true. As a matter of fact, the Federal Cable Act incorporated it into the law, and you have the right to require capacity on that cable system for educational and governmental purposes. And I think Carla can tell you a lot better than I have, but you are doing that in this city, making available to your city and schools the benefit of a cable system for educational and governmental uses. And these aren't program uses, but other types of uses that are important to the city. The ordinance deals with emergency services, and I think that's important. And recently there was a law passed by the Federal Communications Commission, or rule, I guess you'd call it, that mandates that there be access to all multiple dwellings so that tenants within a building, for example, have the right of choice and have the right to receive any cable service just like any independent single-family house would have the right to receive. I think it's important to also recognize that it preserves the rights into the future to make sure that cable providers are meeting community needs. And, you know, this is a limited resource. You can't just have a ton of wires in the street. You should be able to make sure that those that are here are meeting your community needs and are providing a good community service if you're going to make available to them your rights away for their private business purposes. And finally, just a few other items. I know this is kind of a long list, but this ordinance is extremely important. I wanted you to help you understand that. I think that you can have reporting requirements to make sure that you are kept informed on what they are doing, how well they're meeting the community needs, and to provide you with periodic reviews for your benefit. Next slide. We've talked about consumer protections, consumer services, and the FCC standards, the compensation requirements, and other fees that may be necessary as well to support community benefit requirements and so on. Next slide. You can make sure that they don't discriminate and pick and choose or cherry pick the areas that they provide services, and that all your citizens, all households, notwithstanding economic levels or whatever, have the benefit of these services. And the same is true with mobility impaired persons. So in a very quick way, that is the ordinance. The next slide. Then comes what's called a franchise agreement. All of the boilerplate, if you will, or all of the major requirements of the city that may have been embodied in one document, one franchise before, are now in that master ordinance so that everybody is treated in a similar fashion. So what's left to negotiate with each particular cable company is a franchise agreement based on that ordinance. And so what you're really dealing with in a franchise agreement are what are the unique matters that that cable company wants to bring to the table to the community. And you develop a franchise agreement with them. You include the renewal decisions of the city, a term of their franchise, where they're going to provide services, how they're going to extend services throughout the community, agreements for community benefits, whether it's PEG access or institutional networks or other kinds of services, for example, connections to public buildings and schools, insurance and indemnification requirements, and so on. So your franchise agreement is basically a very shortened down document when you have a master ordinance, because most of the legalities, the ordinance, or the requirements, the standards, and so on that are necessary are in that master ordinance that is truly applicable to all persons providing similar services. Next slide. Well, just to wrap things up where we're at, we are here today to help you understand this a little bit, because it is a very important matter for the city. You have a renewal report, and I'll tell you about that. The next steps are to send these materials to the cable company, Mid-Continent, and I think your staff will be sending them draft copies of this master ordinance and franchise agreement, so they have an opportunity to look at those things and to let your staff know if they have any questions, issues, or certain matters that will require some sort of negotiation. So I'm sure there will be meetings with representatives from Mid-Continent, and as a result of that, a new franchise agreement will be completed. This ordinance, a regulatory ordinance, will be brought back to you and both for adoption. And then after that, of course, there would be a closing between the parties and then the administration. And I think what I have found, I think Karen mentioned in my career is having been a full-time city attorney and elected councilman, I can remember starting out as an assistant city attorney. I didn't know what a city planner was. They had all these colorful maps on their wall, but I soon found out they had a very important job in a city. Well, in this day and age, a telecommunications manager, a telecommunication facilities, communication services is just as important, because it is the infrastructure of the future for a community. And oversight and administration of these franchises, those that you've allowed to come here, you want to ensure that they are meeting your standards and requirements and truly provide an ongoing benefit. So how you administer these things is a future decision, as well as adopting the ordinance and agreement. So in a very quick way, and I don't know how long I took, but I hope I didn't dwell too long here, I'd be more than pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Adrian, thank you for educating us on the many aspects of your job, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of us when I say we're glad you do that. Are there any questions of Adrian? Mr. Staggers.
Yes. In recent years, it appears the FCC has been moving away from a monopoly model when it comes to cable services to more competition. Is there any way we could really go even further towards more competition? Because what we have here, it seems like, is kind of like a middle ground. It's not a monopoly, and it does provide for some competition, but it's very bureaucratic with, lots of rules and regulations. In other words, could the City of Sioux Falls simply have an ordinance saying that we welcome anybody to have a cable service here in Sioux Falls, and the only requirement is you're going to have to comply with our standards for the use of the right-of-way and give us an educational channel or something like that? Could we really go even further towards competition?
Well, that's a very large question. I think you have to recognize your right-of-way is a limited resource available. Mm-hmm. Most of these, what you call standards and so on, really have to do with the protection of the right-of-way, number one. Number two, I guess there is a fairness that's involved in looking at, you just can't well, let me step back. First of all, to answer your question, number one, these franchises are not exclusive. There's no limit on the number that you can issue other than what the impact would be, for example, to your right-of-way by overloading it. So then you really get down to the sticky wicket, and that is the level playing field. Your incumbent cable operator, Mid-Continent, has a franchise agreement with you right now, that includes an equal protection provision in it, which says if you grant a franchise to one person, to somebody other than us, they should be obligated to the same terms and conditions or similar terms and conditions. One of the issues that has always been very difficult is areas served. In other words, build out the entire community.
Yeah, we've
versus
kept them, we've kept
cherry
competition.
picking.
Yeah.
Well, I think that we're addressing that in this ordinance because the Federal Communications Commission addressed that and spent a great amount of detail and discussion about level playing field, allowing new entrants and new competition, and saying, for example, cities, you just can't have unreasonable requirements telling them to build out the entire community overnight because it costs a lot of money. And so you have to allow a reasonable time for completion of construction. You have to allow an opportunity for them to achieve some degree of market success in areas that they are providing service. On the other hand, you can require them eventually to build out the entire community. And there's a lot of rationale for that, number one of which is it would be kind of a hodgepodge if you had just a whole bunch of providers and nobody really obligated to serve any particular area or to extend to certain areas. You've got the redlining issue about serving economically disadvantaged areas and making sure that those that are providing service do that. You've got your public educational and governmental access channels. If, in fact, you had 10 different operators in the city, that really wouldn't be very effective because how in the world would you share the programming or would you have to have 10 different types of PEG access operations in order to do that? But I think what it really boils down to, from a legal standpoint, there is the 14th Amendment. You need to treat people that are similarly circumstanced in your ordinance requirements in a similar manner. So you can't, all the court cases that have dealt with the so-called build-out, level playing field and so on, look at it as a whole, and you have to be reasonable about it. I don't think that you could simply open the door and say, well, forget about it, you can get a certificate from us and build when you want, where you want, and so on. It's not realistic. I think
But I mean, legally, could we do that?
No, I don't believe so. I think the Equal Protection Clause would prevent that because you have other operators that you're requiring to build out to the entire city. If you just wanted to hand out franchises to Mid-Continent and the others and to simply say, you get a certificate from us, build where you want, when you want, maybe there's a possibility that there's not discrimination then. But the problem is they've already built out their systems.
So they'll always have an advantage over anybody else.
They do have an
Yes.
advantage because of that.
Yeah.
But you're right about that. I mean, telephone companies aren't obligated to a build-out schedule, for example. They are obligated to serve an area, and they are obligated to provide universal service. But in the case of cable, I think that the FCC has attempted to address that as fairly as possible, recognizing, the power of incumbency. It's very interesting to read that FCC report on this, and I think that they really tried to do a very good job, in fairness, of saying, well, look, somebody new that's coming here simply can't overnight. It would be too costly to build out an entire community, and it may be unreasonable to build it out in X number of years. And so what they came up with is they established a number of guidelines saying, here's what is reasonable and here's what's unreasonable. And anything that's unreasonable is technically preempted by that FCC order. So you have to stay within those guidelines. But then going beyond that, I think when they said, well, a new provider, looking at this cost, they serve an area, they should be afforded an opportunity to achieve market success before being required to extend services to new areas. What else can you do? I mean, I haven't seen a city go back and simply unwind the whole thing and say, well, we're all starting from scratch today, and let's just open up the city and forget about requirements to build out a city. I'm an advocate for the city. I know how important the services of a cable operator can be for a community. And I think if you don't have some sort of reasonable standards to make sure that those that are providing services here do reach out throughout your community, you're missing a community benefit also. So,
I can ask just one other quick question. You have on one of your slides here, in the master ordinance, major provisions, payments to city, 5% of gross revenues.
correct.
But we're putting that in this new ordinance?
What we're putting in, to leave it up to your discretion, is up to 5%.
Okay.
And let's say that, I think you're charging 3% of gross right now. Let's say that with the beginning of this new franchise, you wanted to keep it at 3%. What we're saying in this ordinance is you adopt a resolution simultaneous with this approval of what you want to set it at, 3%, 4%, or 5%. So like, let's say you're making it 3% now, but 2 years down the road, you want to make it 4%. You would adopt a resolution to increase it to 4% and give them a notice that that will go into effect 6 months later. If you don't have up to 5%, preserving that legal right for you, which is what the law provides, and you contract with them today for 3%, you would not have the unilateral right next year or 2 years down the line to say, well, we now want to make it 4%, or we now want to make it 5%. You couldn't do that, because this franchise that you signed with them is a binding contract. So to protect you there, we're putting in up to 5%, which is the legal right, but still giving you, the governing body, to make up your mind as to what the percentage should be.
Thank you.
Councilor Costello and then Brown.
I have a couple questions. Adrian, first of all, you seem to come from quite a municipal background. Do you or your firm, do they represent any cable operators?
No.
Okay.
We had a very interesting. When I first started, I was a city attorney of Bloomington, and franchise put together the cable franchise, first one in Minnesota, that became a standard and somewhat evolved into a national practice. But what I found out very early on is if you represented the cable company as well as the cities, then the cities didn't want you. And if you represent the city, the cable company didn't want you, so you better pick your side. So because of my municipal background, I've always represented municipalities.
Okay, and so
And-
this, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I have an office in Minneapolis. We have an office in Washington, D.C. And we put out every day what's called a daily list. And, of course, if any of you were interested in reading all this stuff, every day out on the web, and several thousand people get it every single day. We provide updates on cable, telecom, and so on. And it's for municipal governments. So our office in D.C. as well as me in Minneapolis, but we focus solely on municipal governments.
So you essentially have written this franchise renewal agreement, franchise agreement, that essentially any new Midco and any other players coming to town would sign this agreement. It would be the same agreement regardless.
Well, the ordinance applies to everybody. There may be if this franchise agreement that we would be renewing with Midco should serve as a model for anybody else as well. Now, there will be differences. He's asked some very good questions, been debated and very controversial about build-out. A new provider, for example, would not be, you would have some further provisions in there about their build-out, extension of service, and so on.
Regardless of build-out, I'm just kind of curious. I mean, does it go like got to have 10% a year over 10 years, or typically, what's the nature of that for a build-out for a new company?
I'll tell you, it varies all over, depending on the size of the community, demand for services, and so on. The one example that I could give you where actually the cable industry and the telecom industry got together and agreed on what's a reasonable time frame, and they put it into law in the state of Virginia, actually, and they said that within 3 years you have to have 35% build out. Within 5 years, 50%. Within 7 years, it's like 60 or 70%. And then if the city wants them to go to 80% build out of the community, the city council is required to conduct a public proceeding, adopt an ordinance requiring it, and then you could require them to go to 80% within a 10-year period of time. We used to look at build-out differently, and it was generally the feeling that the rate of return or for a cable operator to start becoming profitable after building out was generally a 7-year period of time. And, you know, that can be all over the place now because services are so much more expanded. The sources of revenue are considerably increased. I mean, going back to the beginning, I can remember cable companies agreeing to fix in place a rate for services of like $4 per subscriber per month, you know. Nowadays, $100, $150 a month is not an unheard of thing. So your revenues are considerably different. And you've got all these new kinds of things, you know, high definition, video on demand, you know, the movies and so on, alternative telephone services and so on that produce new revenues. So it's, there is no fixed standard. And I think that's why the FCC in this order didn't try to come up with something like this Virginia law, because every community, like I said before, is different, has its own personality, the needs, the interests, the economic level of the community, just a whole myriad of different factors. And so they said, look, instead of doing that, why don't we just say it's fair and reasonable to recognize that a new entrant be allowed a reasonable time for completion, and cities should not compel them to extend their services unless they've achieved some degree of market success where they are providing service.
Then can you, on Mid-Continent now, is it a new agreement or is it a renewal?
It's a renewed process. It'll be a brand new franchise agreement.
Okay, so we had a 10-year term with a 5-year option, and
Correct.
We're coming to the end of the 5-year option.
Well, yeah, we're coming to the end of the 5-year option, which ends on December 29, 2009, I think is what Karen said. Yeah.
I have some questions for Karen, but if others want to maybe.
Mr. Brown?
Mr. Herbst, how do satellite providers fit into this master ordinance? They don't use right-of-way. They, therefore, no franchise fee, no PEG access. I'm just wondering how they fit into this picture.
Well, they don't fit into it, you're right, because they don't use the right-of-way. As far as PEG access goes, there are, under the federal laws, there are certain limitations where they are obligated to provide certain educational channel, but, you know, it's not like local PEG access. As far as no franchise fee, there is not. There are some places, some states have started to impose a tax that is applicable to them. The only thing is, oftentimes people argue, well, there's an unfairness because they're not being charged this franchise fee. Well, it's not really true because they pay huge fees to the Federal Communications Commission, license fees, auction fees, and so on, other kinds of fees that we in local government don't see, but they as an operator see, and if you were to see them list those out, there is somewhat of a level playing field in terms of the overall payments to government for them to provide their services. So, but at any rate, they don't use your right-of-way, so it doesn't apply. I'll tell you what, analogous to that, though, you do have the wireless service providers, the Wi-Fi systems, the WiMAX, and so on that are coming down the line. And many cities have adopted ordinances that deal with those kinds of services. We don't have WiMAX or Wi-Fi video yet, but you do have phone services that hang their equipment on your poles, you know, for example. And a lot of cities have developed ordinances governing that, what the charges should be, and so on. So those service providers do that. And then coming up will be some legal issues if they start providing video services, how those things are going to be dealt with. And the FCC is also still wrestling what we call Internet Protocol Video Service, Internet Protocol Telecom Services, and what is and what is not a cable service. And unfortunately, we don't have all of the final answers on those things today. And again, this is part of the reason for having a master ordinance, is because technology is changing, laws are changing, and so on. And you need to have, in a master ordinance, the flexibility to deal with ongoing change that's going to occur, not only in law, but technology and services as well.
Other questions of Adrian? If not, Adrian, we want to thank you for coming to Sioux Falls. We hope you enjoy the rest of your stay in our city.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
You bet. Karen, would you please come forward again? Councilor Costello?
Karen, I'm curious, was indicated that we have 3% right now. I'm wondering how much does that generate and where does that money go?
It is in our report.
Mike Hall, Central Services. Currently, we collect the 3%, and that revenue for 2007 was just under $600,000.
And where does the money go?
General fund.
Anything else, Pat? Mr. Brown?
I see there are Midco representatives here. I don't know if they want to address anything with the council or not.
I see Dan Nelson's coming forward.
Just to acknowledge that we're here, Dan Nelson representing Mid-Continent Communications, Todd Curtis, our Sioux Falls General Manager, and Mary Lonis, our Regulatory Affairs Manager, are here. My company has worked with Mr. Herbst before. I'll just be meeting his acquaintance after I'm done speaking here. We enjoyed his presentation. We look forward to a productive process. We don't have any problem with what was presented here tonight, and we look forward to getting the job done so we can continue doing business in this great city.
Very good. Questions, Dan? No, none. Looks like you're off the hook, Dan. Thanks, Dan, for coming forward. The third and final thing for our staff report is we're going to have an update on the 11th and Duluth project. Mike Cooper, Director of Planning and Building Services, and Erica Beck, the Senior Planner.
Good afternoon, Erica Beck, City Planning. I'm going to provide you with some updates on the overall progress that we've been making within the Pettigrew Heights neighborhood, and then Mike is going to talk to you about the 11th and Duluth project. I just wanted to let everyone know that the Pettigrew Heights neighborhood continues to meet on a monthly basis, regular basis, the majority of the meetings being held at First United Methodist Church, typically the third Wednesday of the month from 3:30 to 5 p.m. We continue to gain additional participants at the meeting, including residential owners within the neighborhood as well as business owners, and we're really excited about the momentum building within the neighborhood committee. Through the assistance of our neighborhood services intern, Mandy Seek, within our office, we have added all of this information regarding the meetings to our city's web page under the Planning Office and Neighborhood Services. Just a few updates for you in regards to what we've been doing this year within Pettigrew Heights neighborhood. In April of 2008, the Pettigrew Heights Neighborhood Committee hosted a design charrette with the volunteer assistance of Architecture Incorporated, a local architecture firm. With their assistance, participants in this process were able to incorporate their vision for the neighborhood into a 3D model, which was presented at their July neighborhood meeting. The design charrette identified green space and landscaping as really desired elements within the neighborhood. It also identified several services for future redevelopments to consider incorporating within their future redevelopments. These types of services ranged from medical clinics, pharmacies, grocery stores, daycare centers, youth programs, financial institutions, and so forth. So those really basic services is what they're looking for within their neighborhood. In July of this year, the City Planning Office applied for a grant from the City Foundation for costs associated with a potential pilot project within Pettigrew Heights neighborhood, which we are referring to as a Housing Resource Center. The Housing Resource Center pilot program would consist of volunteers staffing an office space within the Pettigrew Heights neighborhood. This office space would provide basic housing information to residents and business owners within the neighborhood. We would anticipate being advised of a potential award from the City Foundation in September of this year. We have been coordinating our efforts in this process, in the startup of the Housing Resource Center, with several nonprofits, including Sioux Empire Housing Partnership, Volunteers of America, and several others. Also, in regards to additional funding for neighborhood revitalization, the City Planning Office, with the assistance of the Neighborhood Committee, will be conducting a needs assessment starting in September of this year. The needs assessment is specifically for the Pettigrew Heights neighborhood and will be provided to the neighborhood in a survey format, one specifically for business owners and one specifically for residences. Based on that information that we gather from this assessment, I think we'll be able to gain a better understanding of the needs that are not being addressed within this neighborhood, therefore allowing us a better opportunity to identify specific potential funding sources as grants and whatnot that we can apply for and address those needs. Through the assistance, again, of our neighborhood services intern, we have coordinated this effort with other nonprofits in our community, such as United Way, the Sioux Empire Housing Partnership again, and then the 211 Helpline Center. These agencies conduct similar surveys and needs assessments through their organizations, and they've been of great assistance to us in our effort. Mike Cooper, Director of Planning and Building Services, is now going to talk to you specifically about the 11th and Duluth project.
Thank you for that, Erica. Questions of Erica? Very good. Thanks again, Erica. Mike?
Good afternoon. We're really pleased to give you this update because we think we've made a lot of progress since we started this project in July of 2006 with the Mayor's Neighborhood Conservation Program. We've received a lot of inquiries about the status of the 11th and Duluth project area, and so I wanted to give you just a real quick update today. This is a location that the city targeted for redevelopment for a number of reasons. It encompasses a large geographical area of just over 1/2 block, and specifically it's located on the south side of West 11th Street between Duluth and Spring Avenues. Some of the properties within this redevelopment area have been for sale for some time. There are 11 properties that we've identified that we would like to propose for redevelopment. Many of the housing structures on these 11 properties can no longer be efficiently renovated and brought up to current housing code standards. There are 2 structures that we believe potentially could be relocated to another area within the city limits. One of the properties actually had a fire and is now vacant. As Erica said, we've been working a long time with the neighborhood committee as well as others in trying to identify how we can move forward from code enforcement to actual redevelopment. So by working with the neighborhood and others, we've identified some certain needs within the neighborhood that we would like to promote in terms of a redevelopment project. And generally what that has been is a mixed-use, multi-level building that would have compatible architecture and uses that could provide services into the neighborhood along with the focus of affordable housing. So with that in mind, the city moved forward to obtain an option to purchase these redevelopment sites earlier in the year. We were fortunate that we were able to work with a local realtor who was representing all the property owners, and it took a lot of effort to put a package together to obtain these options. Following the options being obtained, and because of the location of the property along 11th Street, which is a well-traveled transportation corridor, and also due to the location within kind of the middle of the Pettigrew Heights neighborhood, the city issued a request for proposals for redevelopment of this property. And the proposals that we sent out asked for a redevelopment package that would include affordable housing along with retail or office services on a main level situation. As a result of the RFP being issued, we did receive one response, and that was from St. Joseph Catholic Housing Incorporated. As a result of that response, we then went back to the property owners and asked for an extension on the options because we wanted to continue to look at the proposal and the financing and other details that were included. So we were able to extend the options on the property in order to provide additional time to review the RFP. Since the second option extension was obtained, the city has been meeting with St. Joseph Catholic Housing Incorporated and other potential partners that would be participating within this redevelopment project. We are continuing to review and negotiate, as of today even, on the details of this proposal. And we want to make sure that we have all the information in a final format before we bring forward a final recommendation to the City Council. The proposal, as submitted at least initially, will include a redevelopment of this 11th and Duluth property for the construction of affordable housing along with a main level of retail and or office uses. We believe that if we move forward with this, that we could see construction in 2009, and this will provide a real boost to this Pettigrew Heights neighborhood. We've been hearing for a long time from the neighborhood committee as well as others that the city needs to take a major step forward to initiate a significant redevelopment project within the neighborhood, and that's what we are proposing to do with this particular area. As of August 15th, we did exercise the city's option to purchase the property at 11th and Duluth with a tentative closing date of September 30th. So between now and the end of September, as I said, we are going to continue to work with St. Joseph Catholic Housing as well as others to put together a final financing plan and a more detailed project description that we would bring forward in a more formal presentation to the City Council by the end of September. As I said, we're very excited about the prospects of working on this. We think that because this is the first redevelopment project that the city will be initiating within the neighborhood, it's going to take some bold steps on our part, and we're pleased that we did get one proposal. We obviously talked to other potential developers. It's kind of like the Uptown at Falls Park. You know, we sent out a lot of RFPs. We talked to a number of potential developers, and we ended up getting one good proposal that we're still working towards the implementation. And I think as we move forward with working on the financial details of this that we can present to you later in September, that we're going to see a real good project and a project that meets the needs of the neighborhood as well as a project that addresses the input that we've been receiving from the public of what the city should be initiating. So today we don't have a detailed outline, but we are, as I said, working toward the goal of having this back to you by the end of September. And we're looking forward to making that presentation.
Okay, thanks for that information, Mike. Questions of Mike, Councilor Jameson, and then...
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Good. Sorry I missed you on Saturday.
Yeah, we were looking for you.
Okay.
The mayor showed up, and that was great.
Yes.
Just to clarify, we're going to purchase this area no matter what, right?
Yes.
It's just a matter of what we do with it afterwards. And right now, we've just got one proposal
That's
in our
correct.
hands. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that we had gone back and talked to the property owners a second time, asking if they would be interested in another extension. But honestly, the September 30th deadline is there because there are still some units that are being rented, and the property owners did not want to have to go into October because then that initiates costs to fire up the furnace systems as the weather starts to get colder. So we were given an ultimatum that we either had to exercise the option or we would basically have to start over. And if we started over, I'm not sure that we could keep all these property owners together as a group that would be working with us in the future.
So once we close at the end of September, proposed closing, right?
Yes.
Will the houses then begin to be removed and destroyed, or whatever the process
Yes.
is to clear the area out?
And I should say that the funding that we're going to be used for the acquisition would be the Citibank line of credit. When the city takes possession of these properties, they will be vacant. And then we would work towards two things. We would work towards removal of those units that cannot be rehabbed, and the ones that we think could potentially be moved, we would do RFPs for those. And we would also look at actually trying to provide for salvage of those units that could not be rehabbed, opportunities for salvage.
But you'll be right on it to get them out, so they're not going to be sitting there vacant.
Yes, that would be the intent.
Okay.
Yes.
Good, thanks.
Very good. Mr. Staggers.
Yeah, Mike, September 30th, we're going to give them a check. How much?
The appraisal for the properties came in at $932,000, and the amount that the city will be spending, if I have my figures right, is $903,000. And we've already spent $37,800 of that on the options. So $903 will be the total amount that we'll be spending.
Okay. And then also, You mentioned that we'll probably move 2 of those houses and most likely tear down 9.
I think there's 8 properties that would be removed and 2 that potentially could be located. There was a fire recently on one of the properties, and so
okay.
that's currently vacant.
Okay. How much is that going to cost?
I don't have that information, but that'll be part of our more detailed presentation.
And then also, I just assume that in our negotiations with St. Joseph Catholic Housing, that they've offered a price then for how much they're going to buy the property from the city for?
There is a financial proposal, but honestly, that's what we've been working on. And until we have a chance to analyze that in more detail and still talking to some other potential partners, we felt that it was premature to present that information now.
But if I could just ask, in general terms, is it going to be less than $932,000?
I'm not prepared to give you an answer for that today, Councilor, honestly, because I don't want to give out numbers today that are potentially going to change in the next 30 days.
Yeah, but it's important, I think, for us to know whether we're going to lose money on this.
And that would be part of our presentation in 30 days with a recommendation on the proposal.
Okay. So I take it we do have potential for losing money on this.
I'm not here to say that we will or that we won't.
Councilor Anderson.
Mike, can you identify the buildings that you stated could be moved? Do you know which buildings are?
I don't have the addresses today, but I can get that to you.
Okay.
And that, again, would be, honestly, that was going to be part of our more detailed final report. There's a lot of people that want to know the information even before we do, so we're trying to make sure that we put together the best information when it's ready to be presented.
Councilor Brown.
Mike, do we know the impact on how many renters that will be affected by this move?
I don't know today how many of these units are still occupied, but we have been told by the realtor that in working with the property owners and others that they believe that there's going to be other suitable housing to find for these folks that are currently renting.
I see Shireen Ranshaw from Sioux Falls Housing here. Shireen, do you have any idea, are any of these Sioux Falls housing units?
No, they're not.
Okay.
No, they're all privately owned.
Anything else, Mike?
And we do know that we're, at least the way the proposal looks now, that we will end up with an increase in the number of affordable units versus what is on the property now.
Mr. Staggers.
Yeah, in regard to the people living there right now, my understanding is that this is some of the cheapest housing in Sioux Falls for people of low income. I guess I'm wondering, offhand, where do you think they would move to find comparable cheap housing that they could afford?
I don't have that specific information today.
Yeah. Because this is going to be really a traumatic experience for the people living there. They're going to have to be out by September 30th?
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Of the 11 units, one is burned down. How many of the other properties have code issues that make them
I would say
unlivable?
2 of the other.
So 3 of the 11 are unlivable at this point?
I would say that the two of the remaining units could potentially be brought up to code, but the others are really not financially feasible to continue to provide standard housing.
But are people living in all 10 other
All of the existing units, I believe. I don't know, again, how many of the units are currently occupied.
Mr. Staggers.
Yeah, has the city thought about being more flexible when it comes to codes? Because, you're pointing out, Mike, that these are not up to code. Well, most houses probably in Sioux Falls is not up to code because it's older housing. We keep coming up with new codes and new codes and new codes. Is there any way we can maybe be more flexible so that we could actually maybe salvage some of these homes by just saying, well, no, you don't have to have meet this particular code, and that'll lessen the expense and make it easier to really rehab these?
Well, I would say that, again, this is an area, this specific redevelopment area that we're proposing to work on is one that even the neighborhood committee identified that there needs to be some bold action taken. Otherwise, those units will continue just to be in a substandard condition. And so that's why we identified this, and I think we're fortunate that we have willing sellers, because we believe that if we are successful in working towards the completion of this project, it's going to really begin to encourage others to reinvest into the Pettigrew Heights neighborhood. And if we just let them sit and try to continue to nitpick away with code enforcement violations, that we're not going to gain any ground in the long run. And that's really not what the intent of the neighborhood conservation program was to be.
Yeah, if I could just get your response. I mean, one bold action would be providing more flexibility when it comes to, you know, having these different houses complying with code. I mean, that would be very bold, very innovative, very creative. I mean, I guess I wish that the city would think in those terms, instead of just saying, hey, we want all these houses to be the up to code to the new houses that are being built right now in 2008. I mean, it doesn't seem realistic.
I would say that we are looking at exactly what you're talking about within the neighborhood. This is just one small component of what we've been working on through code enforcement. And as you know, we do have an existing housing code that does have different standards than new construction. We're working on other programs to assist with potential rehabilitation efforts within the neighborhood. And again, as Erica talked about, there's a lot of activity going on with this neighborhood, and there's a lot of additional funding opportunities that we're pursuing, not only for redevelopment, but also for rehabilitation of existing units.
Councilor Costello.
Mike, you know, we've been working on this for, what, a year, over a year and a half or whatever, and it seemed like when we were sitting at the table a while back that we had a number of different developers at the table. Why? Any idea why we only got one proposal?
I don't know for sure why that is, but I think some people felt that they didn't have enough time to put together a package. I'm not sure if that was the reason or not. I think it's much like Uptown. I'll go back to the Uptown at Falls Park. You have kind of an unknown with a redevelopment project, and so not everybody's willing to take a risk and put together a plan that may or may not work for them. But with Sioux Falls, with St. Joseph Catholic Housing, they have a proven track record of working within other neighborhoods, including the North End, the Cathedral area. And so I think that has the opportunity for a real good partnership with the city.
Mike, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for your
we'll
presentation.
look forward to coming back in a month with more specifics.
I look forward to it too, Mike.
Okay.
I know it's been a long, arduous task force that's worked down there. A lot of good citizens have been involved on it, and I think they're great ideas. I drive by there every day. I ride my bike by there at least twice a week, and it can't happen soon enough in my mind.
Thank you.
The next thing that we have in is executive session. I would entertain a motion to go into executive session. So moved by Costello. Looking for a second.
Second.
Second, Jameson. All those in favor go aye.
You might want to explain what it's.
Yes, it is for proposed contract negotiations. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. The